Morning, friends. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Emma Saperstein. I'm the chief curator here at the Art Museum, and these are our dear artists who are in this show. We're all a little bit bleary-eyed. Yeah. We're all a little bit bleary-eyed from a busy few days of openings and dinners and all the things. So we're going to try and be articulate this morning. We're going to do our best. This show is made possible and presented by some really, really wonderful sponsors in the community, including Megan's Organic Market, RRM, our dear friends at RRM Design Group, and Cal Poly's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion's Resonance Cultural Arts Series. So we're so, so grateful for all of those. We also had a lot of support from Hotel SLO, where our lovely artists are staying, from Frameworks. A lot of the work in the show is framed by Frameworks, and they did such a beautiful job, and it was a lot. And so we're so, so grateful for that support as well. This is meant to be a conversation, so I have some questions that we'll sort of go down the line and talk about together, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time at the end for questions from you, especially if you don't surf or aren't familiar with surfing as a sort of industry. We want to make sure that you get to ask your questions, and I'll challenge our artists to make sure to speak to people who don't surf and don't use surf speak. I can share a little bit about how the show came to be. I moved here in 2016, and I started surfing pretty much right away. I did not know what I was doing. I just had this desire to be in the water. And I was very sweetly nurtured by a community of people that I met on the beach who just were like, here, we'll teach you, we'll give you boards, we'll give you wetsuits, we'll tell you that you don't put your wetsuit on at home and drive to the beach. You put your wetsuit on at the beach, and we'll give you tips. And it was very supportive and nurturing. And as I started to work on this show, because I always wanted to do a show that sort of thought about surfing, marry my two loves. But as I started to work on this show, I started to realize that that's a pretty unique experience. I mean, the Central Coast in general is a more nurturing community. There's less localism in the water. It feels more supportive, but it's also I was specifically nurtured in a very specific way, and that's certainly not everyone's experience, and this show is sort of meant to comment on that and think about that together, and celebrate the water and celebrate inclusivity in the water, and also challenge ourselves to be better in how we invite people into that experience. So there are 9 artists in the show, 5 of whom are here, 4 of whom are not. And I think maybe we'll begin by having you all who are here introducing yourself, and then I'll sort of introduce the people who aren't in the room with us. So maybe share a little bit about your background, your practice, and we'll just go down the line briefly.
All right, my name is Shea Somma. I'm a surfboard shaper here in San Luis Obispo. I've been making boards since 2008. And that's my main practice, and this is more or less my first, and that's my daughter. And this is my kind of more or less my first foray into more of the art side of things, so it was a really fun thing to make pieces that were focused less on performance, but more on the ideas behind them. So yeah, that's about it.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Joni Sternbach. I'm an East Coast-based artist who has wormed her way into the West Coast through this photographic project, which I've been working on since 2006. Let's see, what else are we supposed to say?
That's great.
That's enough? All right, there we go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabriella Angotti-Jones, and I'm a photojournalist from Southern California, based in LA. And I've been working on this project, I Just Want to Surf, since 2019. Yeah.
Hey everyone, I'm Stephen Milner. I'm based in Joshua Tree area and San Diego, back and forth. I am a photography-based artist, but I work with sculpture and video and installation as well. Yeah, and I've been working around surfing and images probably for 15 years, I think. Yeah, cool.
Hi everyone, my name's Kunyalala Ndlovu. I'm a writer and essayist and filmmaker and artist, and I'm based in London, England. So I'm grateful to have come all this way actually and hang out with you guys. It's been amazing. And I contributed a number of essays to a book called Afro Surf, which is sort of one of the first books talking about surfing culture from the continent. And a lot of my practice is really to do with bringing sort of unheard of narratives into sort of more public and common spaces. And that's what I'm centrally interested in.
Back it goes.
We're operating with a single mic today. Thank you so much. I'll just point out, so there's 4 artists who aren't here. Catherine Opie, who's a very important photographer, contributed these works. And I won't go into detail about them until we get to that part. Vernon Aki, who is that installation on the wall, Hang 10, Regrew Here, those photographs. Tracy Moffat, whose film is playing on the monitor. And Sandow Burke, who made those lovely gouache drawings. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about what's in this room. And so I'll ask all of you to sort of share what the objects that are in the space, sort of the ideas behind them, and then we'll go from there. Does that sound good? Yeah.
Great. So I made 2 pieces for the show specifically. I call them softboard number 1, softboard number 2. They're intended as a diptych, so they're supposed to be essentially opposites of one another. The first one is a hand-shaped Wavestorm, which is kind of ironic. It's Wavestorm is a softboard that Costco sells for very affordable price of $200. It used to be $8.99. Yeah, exactly, for a moment. Now I think that the Jerry Lopez soft top has supplanted the Wavestorm, but in any case, Wavestorm, in my view, is kind of the iconic version of a softboard that is very cheaply made overseas. They fall apart nearly instantly. They're very affordable, and they're soft, so they won't hurt you if they hit you, or they won't hurt you as much as a hardboard would. So I thought it'd be interesting to explore the idea of softboards because the show is focused on whose waters, inclusion, exclusion, surfing. The softboard quickly became the dominant surf craft in the water, which was a weird shift in kind of dynamics for surfing culture if you'd been surfing longer than the last couple of years. So it was a kind of instantly felt shift. And so the idea of the most commodified, ubiquitous, cheaply made, easily available surfing object to me was an interesting way of thinking about inclusion and exclusion in surfing. And I thought it'd be ironic and funny to make a very traditionally made version of that was handmade, doing all the color with resin panels, which is like a traditional technique from the 60s, casting the fins out of resin, and doing all the color and detail that way. But so from afar, it looks like a soft top. You get up close, you realize, oh, it's actually, in fact, a hard, traditionally made board. The second one is softboard number 2, which is the high-performance shortboard. I hand-shaped and glassed a high-performance shortboard. Then I made a fiberglass mold of that and then filled it with foam rubber so that I made the least functional version of a allegedly high-performance object. Again, it's kind of a visual joke. So you make a really floppy version of something that is allegedly high performance. I thought that would be funny. And then also the high performance shortboard is the other highly commodified model of surfboard that you see often made at a large scale by larger companies in a kind of mass consumer oriented way. So those are my 2 pieces and roughly what they're about.
And just so you know, it's not on right now because it's kind of loud, but the piece, softboard number 2, moves. It has a sort of activation to it, so it sort of has this jiggle going on that contributes to the joke.
I'd also encourage you to give it a squeeze. Yeah.
That's adorable. So my body of work over here is, there's actually 3 different bodies of work, but the largest part of it is the Surfland series, which is a series of tintype portraits of surfers that I've made around the globe since 2006. And this is a project that has taken me places. I didn't take the project places. It brought me to Uruguay, brought me to Australia, brought me to California, to Hawaii, to France, and it's just a project where I felt like I could make these portraits with an antique process and create a dialogue with history about photography, about time, and about how we interact in an ocean landscape. So that's the short story. Yeah, so I spent years standing on the bluffs of ditch plains photographing just the ocean, and I had a very large format camera with a tiny little reducing back just so I could get this little rectangle of a picture. And then one day, it's foggy, I see people emerge under the dark cloth, and I'm thinking, what is this? I'm here by myself, it's the middle of winter, who are these people, and why are they in my picture? So I come out of the dark cloth, and I put two fingers in my mouth, I whistle, and I go like this, get out of my way. They didn't budge. Anyway, that was my first interaction with surfers. Years later, I decided to lift the camera up for a different perspective, to have some sky and some sea in it. And then one day, I was driving to the beach, and I noticed that this storm was going to pass, and I just wanted to be there when that happened. I got there in time, I set up my camera, and I noticed all these surfers in the water as well. And this light broke through this gray cloud, and this, like Turner-esque thing happened on the ocean. I could hear all these surfers cheer with delight. And in that moment, I felt, oh, I guess I have a relationship with these people. We're all we're sharing this landscape. It's a shared environment. And it made me think I had a connection to surfers. And after that, this project began. And so that is the short story. Now I'm going to pass it to you, unless you have a question? Okay.
Hi. I also don't really know how to condense this because this project is a huge part of my life. It's a documentary series kind of on my friend group that I created, that I found through revisiting surfing after leaving it when I was 12 years old. I grew up in San Clemente, which if any of y'all know is a very surfy town, very white. Richard Nixon famously fled there after Watergate. But I grew up there, I grew up surfing and interning at the Ocean Institute down there and being curious about the ocean. And I ended up leaving it because it was so hard to be in the water as a young Grom, as a young girl and a young black girl there. Surfing has this really interesting relationship in each other where it's kind of like when you're in the water, it just kind of evens everything out, and like the Groms talk to the adults, everyone just talks to each other the same, and I internalized a lot of those interactions in a really negative way, and I think I stood out and all that other stuff, so I ended up leaving, and then I returned to it in 2019 after I was interning at the New York Times, and I wanted to do a project that really felt like me after photographing the rise of Trump and the fall of democracy, Loki, and I started documenting this project in a way that I wanted to be visualized, which I grew up in the early 2000s, so I liked Y2K, 90s surf or die kind of aesthetic, and so I decided to photograph my friends in that way. And I also have two new works in this project. They're the fabric pieces that I printed my pictures on. One is crushed velvet with my friend Farmata on it. The other is my friend Autumn in the Rockaways, and that's it's a jersey knit. And I embroidered some of the text from my book onto it. So, yeah.
Thank you. So my work is over there, and it's a new body of work I made for the show. It's called Neoprene Violence. My practice is based around, I guess you can say, with this surfing work. I've photographed in the past before surfing, but I had a hard time kind of creating a narrative for myself, and it was before surf clubs and queer surf clubs, and I had no real community. It was just purely documentary. So with this work, I don't know, I guess I was collecting a lot of surf magazines and also kind of homoerotic magazines as well, all pre-'80s. kind of like the golden age for surfing, and also kind of gay politics as well. So they started having an interesting conversation with each other for me in my studio of the way I treat images or how images work, the ability to recontextualize images based on cropping or collaging. So I kind of use that in a way to explore neoprene as well. I guess I'm interested in materials that people find in surfing. If you're a non-surfer or you are a surfer, I think like there's surf wax. I don't know, I think it brings everyone to a certain place that we can all relate to or visualize. So yeah, I started printing directly onto neoprene as a practice, and then started building these large canvases that were like kind of like wetsuit. Like I think the zippers are really important. You can pull them up and down, but please don't. They're supposed to be fixed for sure, but yeah. But yeah, I guess I was just using these images to kind of create a new narrative that I could relate to, something that I didn't find in these surfing magazines during that time. A lot of it was more focused on like the male on female gaze. That was kind of like an editorial trope, I think, for sure with surfing magazines. So yeah, I do work with other materials as well, surf wax, resin, glassing and stuff too. But this work I felt would be a nice mix for the show, for sure. So.
Yeah, so my excerpt on the wall is from an essay I wrote called The Longing, which is in the Afro Surf book. And I guess in comparison to my esteemed peers, I came to surfing in a really strange way. I was born in Zimbabwe in southern Africa, which is probably one of the most landlocked places on the planet. And I had an experience when I was 12 years old. My dad bought me a Billabong t-shirt, and on the back was this beautiful photo of an Australian surfer sort of tucked in the barrel, finger running against the edge of the wall. And it said, "Only a surfer knows the feeling." And I kind of decided there and then that I was going to become a surfer one day in one shape or other. And I think I made a mental decision that if I catch one wave in my life, that'll be enough. I wouldn't need to sort of prove anything else. So the essay is essentially about that journey of how it took me 27 years to catch that first wave. And a very long story short, I was living in Cape Town in my late 20s, and there's the sort of lineage that I'm from the Ndebele Nation, which was part of the Zulu Nation, who are people who are on the southeastern coast of Southern Africa. So they were already a water-fearing people, for want of a better phrase. And I think centrally sort of ideas of when colonialism came, particularly with European conquest, one of the first things I was sort of literally and physically beaten out of people was this idea that people of color could not be associated with the water. So there's a lot of kind of trauma and anguish and a lot of kind of, racially charged ideas in the water. So being a sort of young black man from a landlocked country, making it into the surf in Cape Town 27 years later was kind of a big moment for me. And the place where I caught my first wave was a place called Bloberg, Shipwreck Bay, which you can see on a clear day, Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. So there's a lot of symbology wrapped within it. And this essay was just an exploration and kind of, and to Emma's credit as well, I think sort of as a metaphor for experiencing this show of how everything has to line up correctly for that moment to happen. I think for anyone who hasn't surfed, we're probably exposed to surfing by seeing the perfect moment. You see the photo, you see the film, but you don't ever see the prep work that comes to it. You don't see the folks in the back line sort of lining up the waves or getting their head and body straight. And so, yeah, that essay was an exploration of that and a sort of continual life practice, if you will.
And I can just share some of the work from the artists who aren't here with us today. So Sandow Burke, who has those gouache prints across from me, two of which were made specifically for the show, which I thought was very sweet. Sandow is an important artist. His work primarily he works in the sort of socio-political space, so he makes really large format drawings and paintings, sort of navigating, understanding the fall of democracy in his perspective and dealing with those themes. But he's also a surfer, like a daily surfer. We met a couple of years ago at an opening in Los Angeles. And so he sort of straddles the sort of fine art world. He shows with Catherine Clark, which is a big gallery in San Francisco. You know, his work is in major collections all over the world. And he also is like showing a lot with like smaller, more grassroots surf galleries in the LA area. And so these are sort of whimsical paintings, very much in his style. With these sort of rogue waves that are silly and sort of overtaking that you wouldn't see as a sort of whimsical reflection on the water and surfing. So one of them is in Morro Bay, you can see Morro Rock, and one of them is in Cayucas. I wish he could have been here this weekend. And then behind me we have Catherine Opie, again, a very important photographer. You know, she doesn't do a ton of landscape works. She's more well known for her portraiture, specifically around sort of rural communities, Americana aesthetics. And she did a project where she rode on a shipping container ship across the ocean and took photos every day. And I can't remember if it was an art, like there is an artist residency where artists can do that. I'm not sure if it was within that formal structure or whether it was a decision that she made on her own. And so these photos are sort of ambiguous in terms of what time of day. Is it morning or night? Is it where it is? Like what land, what country, like are we in? And so there's a sort of mystery there that I think ties beautifully into the question of the show: whose waters are we on? How do we make sure that whatever waters we're in are for everyone? And they're also just remarkably beautiful photographs. So I'm really, really pleased to have her included. Fun fact, she shows with Lehman Maupin Gallery in New York, LA, Korea, and we had to ship these works from Korea. So the museum did its first like major international shipment, which was logistically challenging, and yet here they are. And then on the video, we have Tracy Moffat. Tracy Moffat is a very well-known artist from Australia. People consider her one of the most important artists coming from Australia. She represented Australia at the Venice Biennale like 10 or 15 years ago. She's on the latter end of her career. And this film was made in 1997, and it's called Heaven, and it's this interesting project documenting surfers changing on the beach. And it's funny. It's funny. But it's also like it brings all these uncomfortable questions around voyeurism, around this third space of the beach. Like surfers are always just changing their clothes in public on the beach, which is like, is it public space? Is it private space? Is it... and also really bringing into this question of the female gaze, right? Because all the people she's documenting are male-identifying people. So lots of questions in this work. It's been shown all over the world. It was produced by Dia Beacon in New York. So we're thrilled to have it in the show. Her sweet friend, one of her oldest friends, was here this weekend and unfortunately had to leave before the panel, but sends her best wishes from Tracy. And then on that wall, the installation on that wall, Vernon Aki, who also represented Australia at the Venice Biennale just a few years ago. And this work is sort of an excerpt from a larger project that Vernon has worked on. It includes a film, and we were just talking about the film last night. I decided not to include it because it's really, really intense, and it's quite violent, like it's a very charged film, and it sort of revolves around this event that took place in Australia called the Cronulla riots that were sort of really dramatic. There's a long narrative to them, but a really unfortunate and dramatic racial conflict that took place on the beach between some primarily immigrant surf community members and theoretically local community members that just, it got very, very dramatic. I think, do you remember? I don't remember what year it was. It was not that long ago. It was like, yeah, early 2000s, yeah. Anyway, the riot slogan that the sort of local surfers who were protesting the immigrant community members said, "We grew here, you flew here," and that was the phrase that they used during that conflict. And Vernon Eki, who's an Aboriginal artist, Indigenous artist to Australia, is taking that phrase and sort of decontextualizing it to say, no, actually, we grew here. It's our land. And the surfboards, which have also been exhibited that you see in the photographs, include colors from the Australian Aboriginal flag and family members who are surfers, Vernon's family members, and then the portraits on the back of the surfboards in the photos are family members of his. So there's this plays on language and surf jargon and twisting it and using it in a different way. I think I covered everyone. So let's do another couple of questions and then we'll open it up to y'all. I have talked about sort of the premise of the show connecting with my relationship with the ocean and my sort of tender experience of that. And so I'd love to hear from y'all how a meaningful relationship with the ocean has impacted the way you navigate your life, but also your creative practices.
Sure. So since I was a little kid, my mom, right there, would take me to the beach. I always loved swimming in the water more than anything, and then eventually got the opportunity to learn to surf, and truthfully kind of built my life around trying to stay present and available to go when the waves are good. So I worked jobs that would allow me to do that, and eventually was able to make a go of it actually shaping surfboards too, which has been rewarding in a lot of ways.
You made my board.
Yeah, I've shaped Emma board and glassed it actually too. So yeah, essentially it's been a pretty, centering element in my life, just trying to be around the ocean and go to this place that gives me a lot of joy, not only joy, but exercise, community. I know a lot of folks in the area. Over the years, you surf the same spots and you just get to know those people. I mean, to the point where when I was doing, house projects, I hired people I met in the water to help me. And then, you get to know people from all walks of life, from doctors, lawyers, construction folks, like any profession, any kind of vocation, you can meet that person in the water and that becomes your community. So not only has it provided me, exercise and spiritual grounding and just fun, but also a really great community of people.
Well, I grew up on the East Coast, and so the beaches that I went to were Rockaway and Long Beach. My grandmother had a little cottage by the beach back then, and every summer we'd all go out there and have these family get-togethers, and those were the early years that really grounded me into a relationship with the ocean. But it wasn't until like the 1990s that I kind of had a breakup with photography, and the way I returned back to photography was by taking photographs of the ocean. And since then, a whole other series of photographs have emerged, and I started making the Surfland series and meeting people, creating a community on the beach was something that I had never done or experienced before. In fact, the triptych on the bottom of the women standing in the water is from the movie The Women and the Waves by Heather Hudson, a surf movie. Where did I meet Heather? The beach at Rincon. And I just met so many incredible people when I flew to Australia, and I got to know some of the surfers there. The process of making these pictures, developing them on the beach, on location, having surfers see their image in the moment, just created a conversation with a community that was just, very energetic. So the ocean to me is, it connects everything. It connects the body. It's a connective body of water, connects us all together, and that's the way I think of it.
I think as a Black African American, the Oopsies. Hello. Thank you. I think as a Black African American, the water historically has always been associated with trauma with us, just because we came over from Africa and were placed in that area because of that. So I always found it really interesting that when I grew up in San Clemente, I too started associating the ocean with trauma and difficulty. Like one of the first instances I saw of being around the water was like my cousin almost drowning, and like my mom, love you so much. You put me in junior lifeguards when I was like 9, and I was with 15-year-olds for like 4 years, and so I had to learn how to navigate the ocean at a really young age, and I had a 6-pack. It was so nuts, and so there was that part of it, and then I think just having the interactions of me surfing, I was like, oh my gosh, this place is, everyone talks about how beautiful this place is, and it just like kind of sucks to me. And, but I was always really fascinated with it. And I was like, why do I keep getting drawn back to it? Why do I want to study it, like marine science and like do conservation photography? And it wasn't until like I barely took a break and really started examining it, I was like, dang, like the ocean is a place where I process stuff that's really difficult for me. And really starting to examine that through the book, I was like, dang, like that's when I started realizing that like the weight of being like a Black woman and the Black girl and like just a girl and like just like all these different things, and like just noticing like socioeconomic classes and like how men and women interacted. And I was like, once I really started to like deconstruct that through photography, I kind of realized that the basis of all that was kind of like my depression and like being like a depressed person. And like we don't talk it enough in the surf industry, but like a lot of us go to the ocean or do action sports because we have something we need to work through. Like there's a reason why we slam into the water over and over again. Like
I thought you just liked it.
Yeah, it kind of, yeah. Anyway, so like there's a reason. We all have a reason why we go to it. We all have something we need to work through. And I'm so grateful for my friends and the people that let me photograph them, because I realized that like we just want to have joy, and we just want to find joy, and so many of us find joy through working through stuff. And yeah, that's kind of my relationship with the ocean.
Yeah, gonna piggyback on that too. With yeah, it's definitely a place. For me, I like to be out in the ocean alone. Like I love community and everything as well, but for me, it's a place to be alone and to process things, whether it's something important or just really stupid, and just to have that alone time. And that's actually where I get a lot of ideas for work too, is just like sitting out there and bobbing up and down, even if I'm not catching a lot of waves. But I was fortunate enough to grow up in Long Island on the North Fork and spent a lot of time in the water doing everything, and have always lived near the water until very recently. Now I'm in Joshua Tree, and I don't know how I feel about that yet. I love the desert. But it is very important for me to be by the coast and be grounded. It's something, it just grounds me, and yeah, it's very helpful. And it's also just a honeypot of material as an artist too. So I'm fortunate I found this kind of body of work that I've been kind of riding that wave ever since starting first, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, as I said, I grew up in Southern Africa, in quote unquote what people might call the apartheid after party, and my generation. I was born in 1987. Independence was brought to Zimbabwe in 1980. So it's always been close. There's always been something in the rearview mirror of this kind of awful tragedy that occurred. And I often reflect, when I lived in Cape Town, if you go to the top of Table Mountain, which is this beautiful mountain that overlooks the entire peninsula, there's a small brass plaque that has this really weird fact where it says around 350 to 400 shipwrecks are littered all around the Cape. And I always found that really interesting, of trying to understand the question of what were people running away from that was so terrible in Europe that they were willing to cross over and die in an ocean to come to a place they didn't know or understand. So in effect, I have quite a tenuous relationship with the ocean, because even though I didn't grow up near it, everything that impacted and affected the sort of future of our lives came through the ocean. sort of every kingdom met its demise because of ships that came. And so sort of coming to the realization that surfing is this, it's wonderfully calm experience. And, something I even wanted to ask, my new friends here is that when I started surfing, I couldn't get over how quiet it was in the back. I think when you watch it from the beach, it's so noisy. All you hear is the crashing waves, and when you're in the back line, it's just like utter peace. And I think that sort of has helped me redefine my relationship with the ocean. And I think traditionally as a people, again, I think, like Black Southern Africans had always actively had this challenging relationship with salt water. And, even, I know we were talking about this a bit last night, but, even in terms of some derogatory terms that were used, one I found most fascinating was non-swimmer, was a word that was used to describe black people because you weren't traditionally seen in swimming pools or in oceans or anything like that. So my presence in the water is kind of no matter whether it's one wave or 5 or 50 times in the ocean, is sort of a kind of, say, rebellion or reclaimance, if you will, that everything that I was set out to, supposed to not reach, has kind of been crushed and pushed out the way. And that the ocean can heal and purify ourselves and recenter ourselves. So yeah, that's certainly my relationship.
Thanks, y'all. We have about 20 minutes left, so I'd love to open it up for questions from all of you. And I'll come around with the mic so that our sweet videographer can catch all your questions. Anybody have a question? Yeah?
For Joni, how did you get started doing tintype, and maybe explain what's involved?
Well, thank you, Nola. I got started doing tintypes with this guy named John Coffer, who lived off the grid in upstate New York. I just went up for a weekend to take a workshop, and look at me now. This guy, he showed us how to make tintypes on his little porch that he'd crafted by hand. His whole little cabin was all handmade by him, his outhouse, everything, his dark box. And I just became enthralled with the process because it's like the Polaroid of yesteryear. That's what I call it. It's instant, but instant takes about 15 minutes. So, every time I coat a plate and I take a photograph and I expose it, develop it, I plunge it into the fixer in broad daylight, and all of my subjects, photographic subjects, see their image appear like magic. And it just was a very important part of the project because one person would see it and become completely thrilled by it, and then more people would see it and want to have their photograph made. And so it just became like a calling card, a little bit of a trick. Yeah, kind of thing. So does that answer your question?
I had kind of a general question for all of you in terms of, I have this hard time picturing if you're not, the first time you go surfing, the first time you approach the water and approach the surfers, do you have your own little gang around you? Are you solo? I mean, it makes me fearful just thinking about it. So, because I grew up in Southern California, and they were a really intense tribe of their own. So I'm just wondering how that was for each of you.
I was really fortunate in my experience. I basically used to started working for an old acquaintance who became one of my best friends, and he was an East Coast boy from a place called Durban, and we connected over many different things, but he was a big fan of Patagonia, and I don't know if anyone's read Let My People Go Surfing. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. But he instilled as a business practice that as Patagonia does, if the waves are firing, we can all go surf, as long as the work is done. So every Monday morning, we'd all go together as a studio. And so for my first year bonus, I got a Mini-Mal, which is my first board. But I basically got to learn with a bunch of friends. And I think that really helped sort of knock off the kind of intimidation factor, if you will, because it's quite confronting, I think, if you have no idea, even just down to things like if you don't even know how much strength you need to get into the back, to have someone next to you to be like, oh, mate, come this way, it's a bit more mellow or whichever. That's really great, and it gives you more confidence to be able to talk to other people. Because I don't know, and I'll be curious to know from these guys as well, like if, some surfers are always excited to see new kids trying it, some hate it, some would make it very clear to get out the way. But it's sort of safety in early numbers.
Yeah, I think, I started surfing on my own, but I think if I look back on it now, I use the camera as a vehicle to access surfing, to kind of get in there, and I was documenting surfing in Long Island, and then also when I was living in Hong Kong, I did a body of work on a local surf village, but it was different for me then because I was closeted with these people too, so they didn't really know my sexuality and stuff, and so there was always this kind of like, they just know me for being in the water and that's it. I didn't really ever have a community of people, queer people to surf with, so I still have a bad habit of surfing alone, Now we have so many great surf clubs too to join in on, and I think that's fantastic because it really allows access to get in the water, because you surround yourself with people like-minded and you can go in a group, and so I think those are really important. But for me, I still have that bad habit of surfing alone, but I like it because I actually get to sit there and think about things and work through things, so yeah.
To jump off what you're saying is I think it really depends on your mood. Sometimes you just want to have alone time. Sometimes, the group of people I surf with, we just want to be a group of hot black girls that just want to show up at a beach and piss off white boys and drop in on them. And it's reparations. I'm so sorry. So that's how I think my friend pointed out the backdrop of this period that I documented was during COVID. Which a lot of black and brown people started surfing for the first time. And it was a huge shift in surfing, a lot of just across the board. So, and people didn't really know what is called etiquette. So they would just show up in really big groups of black people, brown people, queer people, especially in LA at Topanga, which notoriously is the most chaotic, you made that face, it's chatty, it's localized, it's mean. So we would just show up and we would just basically tell people to F off and drop in, and it was just chaotic and a mess and super dangerous, but it was really fun. And I think it was fun to kind of be that presence and wreck that and be yo, we're here. And then I think since then, a lot of us have scaled back and learned proper etiquette and stuff like that. But I do think surfing in groups has been really helpful for my group of friends. For me personally, I also like to surf alone now, or I surf with my one really good friend, just because he grew up in the same context as me. And honestly, it's been kind of hard to relate to the newer surfers because they just don't get it. I don't know. Cancel me. They just I don't know. They just don't understand what it's like to grow up in a small beach community and know the lingo and the etiquette and the culture and history. And to piggyback off of what I just said, I grew up surfing with my neighbors. That's how in San Clemente that you would be taught was through your neighbors and through your family. And since we moved there, I had to rely on my neighbors and my friends to learn it. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
They didn't read Sean Thompson's 12 steps to surfing?
No, nobody does that. People have Costco boards now. They just go.
I know Sean Thompson. I'm so excited you mentioned it.
Well, my first experience with surfers was through photography. I hauled my 8x10 camera to the beach, my chemistry, my dark box, and I was terrified. I had no idea what to expect because I'm not a surfer. And so I used photography as my language to draw people in. I just set up my camera and I waited for people to come to me. And then conversation happened and interaction happened. But I don't know why I was so intimidated by surfers originally. I think I just saw them as very territorial. Maybe it was a prejudice, I don't know. So I was quickly absolved of that because I've really experienced over the course of time a sense of inclusivity with surfers, especially because I'm not a surfer, and they've pulled me into their world.
Yeah, so for me, my entry point was definitely, like I said, as a kid, going to the beach and swimming a lot, and I was pretty comfortable in the water initially just because my first experiences were just swimming and then body surfing and then bodyboarding. So I kind of worked up the ranks of craft, I guess you'd say, and then I got taught by a family friend when I was around 11, 12 years old, and so I had a nice kind of entry that way. But to your point and to the points of folks before me, I think there's been a big shift in terms of inclusivity. I mean, kind of what my pieces are about is the habit of surfers to essentially assess other people based on their craft. And, there's an assumption that's made if you walk up with a soft top, then you must be a beginner and you must not know what you're doing, and therefore we are kind of opposed to you if we're a more experienced group, right? And then if you walk up with a high-performance shortboard or allegedly high-performance, then you might know what you're doing, and therefore you're a threat in terms of you might get waves that I otherwise would be getting. So there is a kind of like hunter mentality of there's a limited resource of waves, we're all competing for the same thing, and therefore if I'm assessing you based on your abilities, whether or not you're a competition to me. That said, that energy has definitely mellowed out post-COVID. There was a massive boom of all kinds of people, like Gabriella was saying, entering the water all at once, instantly, and I think it was a real kind of shift in culture. And so that's been an interesting moment where a lot of the kind of negative or hyper competitive parts of the culture have definitely mellowed out since then. So it's very different from when I grew up. And I also grew up in Orange County, and a lot of the breaks are very, very localized, and you had to pay attention very closely to who was out and what the hierarchy was and that kind of thing. And that part of it has also somewhat mellowed out. But it also just depends on the spots you're going, because a lot of spots are still like that. So you definitely have to be aware of, your place and try and get in where you fit in. But yeah, it's all shifting, and it's an interesting moment for that. Yep.
Any other questions from the group? Hello. Sorry, boss.
I'm going to insist that Emma tell her origin story of learning to surf in Morro Bay, because it makes me fall more in love with this town this community every time she tells it, and I've made her tell it a lot.
I think I've told it like 10 times this week. I moved here in 2016, and my dad had a colleague who didn't live in California before, but had lived in Santa Cruz, and his colleague was like, oh, if you're interested in surfing, you can have all my old boards, and they were truly ancient. So I've heard from surfers that like some of them are like really important shapers, or like there's some cool history to them. I had no idea, so I just drove my truck up to Santa Cruz, and my dad's colleague's mom led me up to their dusty attic, and I had to like dig through and take all these boards, and they were all dinged up, and then I got my first wetsuit and started surfing, and I went to the Rock, which I don't surf the Rock anymore because I think there's too many dude bros, so I avoid the Rock. But I went to the Rock, and I'd put my wetsuit on at home and drive down to the beach in my wetsuit, very hot. And I was surfing there, not surfing. I couldn't even sit on the board. Like, I couldn't even balance my body. There's so much like nuanced learning in your body, and so I couldn't even stay put. I just would be like here for a minute and then like bloop. And a guy who's now a friend paddled over to me and said, "You look like a kook." And I was like, yeah, it's my second time or whatever. And he asked me for my address, and I'm embarrassed to say that I gave it to him. And later that day, he dropped off a longboard in my driveway that apparently is called Pickle. It's a 10-foot longboard, very heavy, waterlogged, like it's a heavy, old board. And I surfed that board for quite a while. You can catch literally anything, like you can, anything on it. And then apparently it was sort of a community board, so people who were learning would give it to each other, and a lot of people had surfed it before. When I would be surfing, people would paddle over to me and say, "Oh, that gave me 3 concussions. That board gave me 3 concussions." It actually did give me a little bonk myself. And then the idea was that you were supposed to gift it to someone else, who's learning to surf. So I gave it to someone else, and then eventually, and the guy who gave it to me, his name is Phil. Eventually, it ended up with his daughter, who is also a surfer. So that's my story. And I also the person who really sort of took me under their wing and taught me how to surf. He saw me. His name is Ivan. He's been surfing every day. He's a Brazilian surfer. He's been surfing every day since he was like 7. He surfs wave storms. Like that, he surfs the beginner's board, so it's funny. But he caught me, like I was gonna go surfing, and it was a day that I definitely did not belong in the water, but I didn't know enough about how to read the waves to know that it was like dangerous for a very inexperienced person. He sort of was like, "Okay, I'll go with you," and was very supportive. So I had a lot of friends in the water. Do we have any other questions for the group before we wrap up?
Thank you all so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. The show is open until October, so bring your friends, send your surf friends. We're doing a number of programs connected to the exhibition. On August 11th, we're doing a surfboard swap. Shea does these every year, and we're doing it on the museum's lawn where surfers can bring their boards and they can trade and buy new boards, which will be very fun. Right now, we have the Second Saturday activity going on outside, so take some boxes for your kids or grandkids. It's connected to the show. It's a fun activity till 1 o'clock, and then later in the year in September and October, dates are still being finalized. We're doing an Indigenous Surfer Symposium in collaboration with my friend Lydia Heberling, who teaches critical surf studies at Cal Poly, which I thought was a made-up class. It is not. And then an organization from Southern California called Native Like Water that works primarily with indigenous communities learning how to surf and experiencing the water, have a documentary that we're going to be screening probably September 5th. So get on our newsletter if you're not, to make sure you're up to date on those activities. And thank you. Thank you.